Our final speaker of the day is Michael Hayford, the CEO of Lighthouse Strategies. Now, that's the company behind the ever hard to pronounce Cannabiniers, who's joining us to speak about an operation of audacious size. Cannabiniers is coming to the space with a strategy to normalize responsible consumption around the recreational and wellness benefits of cannabis-infused adult beverages. Now, they bought de-alcoholizing technology, and they're using it to place themselves firmly in the race to build cannabis beers. And that means that they're large-scale brand building against the largest beer and beverage companies in the world. Leveraging the brand's core beliefs, Hayford is committed to building and maintaining the most valuable asset of all, consumer trust. Because consumer trust, as we've talked all day long, is where normalization happens. So Cannabiniers owns Two Roots Brewing Company, which has become the leader of the infused beverage category in Nevada's dispensary system. They have plans to grow and scale the brand family in a way that extends far beyond the state level. Michael Hayford's here to share those ideas and talk about ways new cannabis companies can think about moving fast and nailing down the big ideas that they need to understand in order to compete on a national or even global stage. Please welcome Michael Hayford.
We will be the leader in the cannabis industry from a beverage perspective with responsible products that consumers can trust. Lighthouse Strategies is a portfolio management company. Today we maintain 11 companies, 8 brands, soon to be 14 brands.
The type of brands that we're building here at Lighthouse Strategies meet at the intersection of consumer preference and lifestyle integration. For a very long time in the cannabis industry, consumers have been forced to align with products. And for the first time, we're seeing this shift where now products are aligning with consumers.
Along that path, it's really important to us that we have the opportunity to educate our consumers and the general population to remove social stigmas that have been in place historically with the cannabis space.
We did a tremendous amount of data research on various consumer trends to identify what was important to people. We focused on some of the consumer staples such as coffee, tea, beer, and we identified strategies around how to maximize the potential in those marketplaces.
What I think is most important about Lighthouse is positioning itself as a first mover in this cannabis space, this rapidly evolving consumer space, and Lighthouse providing the direction and guidance and pace to be first movers.
By owning breweries, by owning tea companies, by owning cannabis organizations, right? We're creating that convergence so that we can control quality and supply chain, consumer interaction, data collection, while developing brands that'll be the future of our industry, which we forecast that within the next 10 years could represent a $25 billion a year market segment in just the cannabis industry.
The reception of the products that are in the market, Two Roots cannabis-infused beer and Baskin topicals and transdermals, has been nothing short of phenomenal. These incredible sales results are a testament to the success we have seen by taking the road less traveled.
Our entire company is committed to helping patients and being on the cutting edge of research and medical issues regarding the use of cannabinoids.
Lighthouse is far ahead of others in the U.S. industry in the technology and processes for producing great tasting non-alcohol beers.
So we create our cannabis-infused beer by starting with a full-strength, traditionally made craft beer, and then we gently remove the alcohol with a process that allows us to maintain the integrity of the flavor. And then it's impactful because we're able to create a healthier alternative to traditional beer. Less calories, less carbohydrates, and less alcohol. And it allows us to put in THC.
Investors should feel that this is a tremendous opportunity to get on the ground floor of an industry that's going to be changing the cannabis market.
Lighthouse Strategies is expanding its reach and capabilities. In California and Nevada today, we're vertically integrated in those states. We're opening up in Massachusetts, Michigan, Oregon, Colorado, and other states going forward in 2019.
Since 2013, Lighthouse Strategies has started from a 3,500 square foot retail facility in Nevada to almost encompassing now 85,000 square feet of real estate, cultivation, manufacturing, retailing.
Our team is comprised of some really brilliant, passionate, driven people, and we've taken that and leveraged it collectively internally so that we can drive the market forward and create really unique waves in the space.
We've assembled a first-class executive team that has a strong background in consumer packaged goods. Our executives are second to none in the branding business and the distribution business.
Now that we're seeing this normalization shift that's happening on a national and even global level, it's really critical that we bring products to consumers that they are familiar with, so that transition towards the cannabis industry is a lot easier for them.
What truly makes Lighthouse Strategies stand out from everyone else in the industry is that we control the channel by maintaining cultivation, manufacturing, retail, brewery, and hospitality operations.
Beyond 2019 for Lighthouse, what we're looking at is establishing a portfolio of businesses that have a revenue capacity of about $250 million in annualized revenues from the cannabis operations, and in parallel, about $500 million in annual revenue capacity out of our beverage production facilities, which would include traditional, non-alcoholic, CBD infused, and THC infused beverages across the United States.
So after all that, can you tell us your company's structure?
Hello? Yeah, we structured Lighthouse really with optionality in mind, not knowing what the end would look like. So when we started to look at the market, we entered as a cannabis company in Nevada, and then we began as a brand company, and we looked at the intellectual properties, and we said, we don't know where this is going to go. We don't know what a potential exit might look like, or what an acquirer, what would be interesting to them. So we said, let's build out a structure that allows us to silo operations based upon the asset classes and what they do. So that could be real estate. We have a real estate holding company. We have different verticals, whether it's California, Nevada, cannabis. Those are held in different silos. And then our beer and beverages are in one silo. And then we have an intellectual property in another one. So we just keep them isolated, build on that, and see where the future takes us.
What's the true north from a CPG standpoint?
True north. Give me a little more context.
What's the goal from a CPG standpoint?
When we began this, I entered the space, not a cannabis consumer. My brother had brain cancer, turned to cannabis post-operatively to help him deal with that. And then next thing I know, we moved forward. I'm an owner in a dispensary, and I start to look at what's under the glass, right? And I'm looking around and going, smoke or eat junk food. And when you have a loved one who's dealing with, a serious medical crisis, they're not going to be eating chocolate bars 4 times a day. You're going to create a different problem. Smoking generally is not healthy. And so when we started looking at that, we said we need to find products that are healthy, safe, and that fit the consumers. It was our goal.
So can you provide an update on your craft brewery acquisition strategy?
We came into 2019. We have already acquired 2 craft breweries. We have 2 more that are under LOI today. And then we began discussions that we didn't see coming with one of the top 10 craft brewers in the United States that started out to look something very intimate. Now it's looking like it could be a joint venture. And depending on how that turns out, we may add more breweries, or we might not need to.
So using that as sort of a jumping off point, let's talk about where you plan to take this beverage and what the sort of competitive environment is around that plan.
Sure. I mean, the nice thing about what we're doing is we've chosen a direction that first creates a bridge to consumers that are leaving alcohol, right? So there's a couple different studies showing that over 10 years there was a 15% reduction in medical-only states. Colorado in 2016 showed that after 1 year of recreational consumption, that alcohol fell another 12%. And so we looked at that and said, let's create a bridge here, because if yesterday you were walking into a liquor store and today you're walking into a dispensary, the opportunity to find something you'd already be approachable to, facing junk food and smoking, have a high likelihood of capturing that consumer. When we look at where we're going to go, today we have 5 states that we have licensing in. We've got 2 more that we're working on. And then our goal is to establish a joint venture agreement with some of the MSOs in the country. We're talking to 3 of those today about bringing our brands there.
MSOs being multi-state operators.
Correct. The largest, state-by-state cannabis operators in the country. And then, so at that level, we would have the goal is to have 20 states that we'd have our brand presence in. And we start to look at what the competitive nature is. It's really market by market. So in California, you could look at Hi-Fi Hops. Although it's a sparkling water, they are doing very well in the market. If I go to Colorado, we'd look at Sierra Beverage. They're taking a position in that market. We've got Nevada, and now we're entering California. So there's only a couple of us in the sector today. The big question mark that everybody was asked is, what about the big guys?
And what about them?
It's interesting as much as we want the federal laws to change as entrepreneurs, we want to be able to maintain our opportunity. We have 50 individual states. They all act like countries. So the big guys are going to be standing on the sideline for some period. Although, people will talk about the Canadian LPs that are making investments into organizations in the U.S. But we've got time, not a lot of time, but we've got enough time to move forward and capture market share.
So we haven't yet talked about what the product is. So what is Two Roots?
Well, I think the first thing is when you say what the product is, we actually start out with a solution. I have a systems integration background, software and technology, hardware, and we always solve problems for organizations with that. When we approached a CPG, we started the same way. What's the problem? How do I solve it? And so ultimately, Two Roots is just one of a series of a platform of beverages. We have Just Society, which is cold brew coffees and teas, and then we have Creative Waters, which is our sparkling waters, all of which actually represent the same thing but point at different demographics, right? So,
and what is that thing they represent?
They represent A, normalization
of
the consumption of cannabis, B, a social platform that people can consume. So we launched, I live in California, but we launched in Nevada first. So the first week we launched, I bought a couple cases of beer. My wife's mother, 75th birthday, and I took a case of beer, can of beer, to the barbecue, and I put it in the normal beer cooler.
You didn't just drink it all beforehand since your wife's mother?
No, my wife loves it. I'm not there yet, so I like being a little bit edgy. She likes being relaxed. But the interesting thing was to actually observe 75 people being exposed to 24 can of beers in the beer cooler and how they react. It was actually really interesting.
How did they react?
First, from 21 to 75, no one thought twice. I took photos afterwards, and I could find a Two Roots can on the table right next to a Dr. Pepper or a beer you'd know, right? And then the activities were great. Social anxiety kind of drops away is the first thing we hear from people that try our product. And people become very light. They become very comical. It's actually a delight to watch.
I find them becoming more and more comical as they go on. So what needs to happen to prove product viability and through that brand viability?
Well, I think product viability, how do we prove that? I think it really requires microdata. And, we had New Frontier up here, and they get to see really broad data. But a lot of what was shared is actually part of what we're actually seeing, what we're driving on ourselves. So we have to drill into the microdata. So we start looking at microdata. What do you need? We need store adoption. Store adoption is driven by consumer demand. But what's unique about dispensaries is dispensaries can actually mitigate demand based upon how they set up their resale environment. And so there's a whole change that needs to occur with actual dispensaries, because if you put the beer in the back room and it's not on the top shelf, how do they find it? How do you promote it? And what we found in Nevada so far, and now in San Francisco at Mo Green's, that when the product's placed on the shelf right next to a flower product, it's outperforming flower and it's outperforming gummies. In our store, we sell 2,000 units a month. That's 60 units a day, right? If I look at a Dixie Elixir, we sell that in our store too, and it's a very good product. We're selling 10 to 12 of those a day. And much to the point that was shared again by New Frontier, there's 2 different consumers there. One that's buying for effect and price per milligram, and the other one who's buying for experience, something they can enjoy and socialize with.
So low-dose product sells more than high-dose product.
Yeah.
And what's the price point difference?
It's a 6x difference with low dose costing more than the high dose. If you look,
I'm sorry, I just want to make that clear. It is a 6x difference with low dose costing more than high dose. And that is it's such a variation from traditional CPG.
100%, but realize first off, what are we selling, right? Are we selling weed, or are we selling a solution? And so we have a safe product. It's microdosed. It has onset within 5 to 15 minutes. So when you're that low in dosing and you can know what the effects will be that early, the fear factor goes down. I'll try that, right? And then they come back.
So again, let's talk about where the entrepreneurs are, where the strategics are relative to your position.
I think when you look at entrepreneurs, we break them into two categories. We have a legacy entrepreneur, and we have an emerging entrepreneur. On the legacy side, you're going to find products that are 100 milligrams a bottle. You drink them out of a cough syrup cup to get 5 milligrams, and then you wait 45 minutes to upwards of 2 hours for effect. And there's a number of those in the market, and some of them doing very well on a localized basis. And then you have to step into the next, which is the new and emerging products on the entrepreneur side, where you have products that are much more in line with consumers. They're lowering the doses. In some cases, they're pushing the edge on fast acting and rapid offset. In other cases, they're still long duration for onset. Their proximity to us, in Nevada as an example, it took only 4 months for Two Roots to go from an unknown product being released to taking the number 1 to number 5 spots of the top 10 beverages in the state, pushing out brands that are 7 to 10 years old in market. And so that's a good sign because it fits, right? And then when you move back to saying with strategics, where are the strategics? The strategics are circling the space, right? There's almost $1 trillion in market cap that's looking in on the U.S. market for cannabis beverages, and they're trying to figure out where they're going to enter.
So let's talk about, we spent a lot of time talking about this before. How does Canada figure into this? Because they're not just circling, they're actually just hanging out in the north. So you're developing a brand in what you hope will be about 20 states, knowing that AB and the other big beverage strategics, Constellation, are hooked up with companies in Canada, and that they may come sweeping down from the north. So let's talk about what that foot race is like.
Well, that's the thing that'll keep you up at night as an entrepreneur, right? Because we got 3 years invested in creating a product that's fast acting, low calorie, socially integrated, something you can consume next to the person having a beer, and no one's going to look at you sideways. But they can outspend anybody, right? I mean, they can just write the checks, and that buys time. And so the one thing we count on is our regulations, right? Even if federal law changed, banking bills laws change, every state law still stands, which means is every state has fences. And you can't just go in and open a business in New York because there's only X licenses. And you can't ship it across country still, even federally legal, because every license holder in every state is bound to sell and buy from only the other entities that are licensed in that state. So you have still 50 states. So when the big boys want to come down, the big boys are going to have to be looking large scale. Do I want to go and try and buy one here, one here, one here, or do I want to buy large? So that's a barrier for them and an opportunity for us. When we look at Canada, Canada is also an opportunity for us. If you think about, and maybe a show of hands, who thinks there's a really good non-alcoholic beer in the world? Right? Not very many. There's very few of them, and it's actually a very common in the alcohol industry to think that there isn't a good non-alcoholic beer. What's that resulted in Canada is they're building big beverage centers. They're building for RTDs. They're building for teas and sparkling waters. Well, we're beer. So we actually could be a nice fit or an augmentation to their platform and offering, which would give us good exposure into those markets.
If you're a good enough non-alcoholic beer.
Oh, we're already there.
And so what are the steps you've taken?
Well, 3 years of research. We brought technology in the U.S. It's to de-alkalize beer that never got here. And then we bought a brewery we could place it in. Then we recruited a head brewer from a leading independent craft brewer. We maximized and developed our beer by itself. Then we maximized it as a de-alkalized beer. And then we moved it into our cannabis environment. And what's interesting is there's only 2 companies in the world that actually directly own assets in cannabis and alcohol. That's Constellation Brands and that's Lighthouse. Obviously, they're a lot bigger, but the insights we gained through sitting on both sides of the fence is what allowed us to get there first.
How much time do you think, to establish position in the U.S. before the floodgates open from up north? And also, how much time do you have to establish position in Canada before in terms of getting Two Roots to be part of that lifestyle?
Well, that's a good question, right? So for Canada, I'll go backwards on the questions. We've spoken to 3 of the largest ones that are up there that have alcohol joint ventures. We've gotten to know them, and I think that it's possible that by the end of this year we could potentially be in one of their portfolios, leveraging their infrastructure, their distribution. And the reason they would is A, because we augment, we don't conflict, but B, is from that perspective looking down, because the marketing restrictions in Canada are so significant, they believe that our almost 2-year advanced process of building brand will allow consumers in Canada to already know what a Two Roots is. You went up and met with a bunch of investment banks. They knew what Two Roots is. They didn't know who Lighthouse was, right? So Two Roots is actually establishing a brand in the U.S., which they believe will influence Canada. And as we continue this, we're now pretty close to actually entering traditional retail with our non-alcoholic and traditional craft beer as part of our consumer awareness and education process.
So you mentioned traditional retail. It seems like, from our discussion before, the biggest environmental change you're expecting is that these beers, this form factor, will move out of the dispensary. So let's talk about that, why you expect it to happen, and what actually needs to happen for that to be the case.
Well, if we take a look at global non-alcoholic beer, we look at Europe, we're going to find that it's growing very rapidly, 8.5% CAGR. When we wrote our business plan, we said, well, if it does really well in dispensaries and it has lots of visibility, why wouldn't we want to offer it into traditional retail as a non-alcoholic or a craft beer? What we thought that would be further down the road. What we realized was people were actually enjoying the flavor of the beer so much. They were talking about that more than the effects at first. And so the light bulb went on. Why do we have to wait? If we have the production capacity, why not start now? Why not move education forward, inform the consumers, the market, that this product's available non-alcoholic, but if you're going to learn about us, you're going to learn that there's a THC and a CBD version of the products.
So aren't you expecting to be able to sell those THC and CBD versions outside of dispensaries?
THC not in the short term, but when
what are you defining as the short term?
Next 3 years, 4 years.
Okay.
When we look at CBD, yes, I think on-premise, I think off-premise, I think non-alcoholic, and in the end, how do I reach a consumer that I can't market to today as a cannabis company? Well, if you pick a retailer and I'm in all their stores and they love the edginess of associating with a company that has brands in both markets, such as the Las Vegas Lights Soccer Club, who we are now their official craft beer. It's our traditional alcoholic beer, but they love the edginess because they knew they'd get some publicity out of it, and now we're their official craft beer.
Well, they are a light unto us all.
Sure.
So I just, knowing that you're coming in from a systems background, what are some of the key learnings that you've developed that you think could be applicable to startups in this space?
The biggest thing, one of the biggest things that I learned is that we try to build a lot of stuff from scratch, not knowing, and that costs us a lot of time, and it actually costs us a lot of money. And we start to look at the market, part of the whole brewery concept that today craft beer is under a lot of pressure. The knowledge base, the assets, the resources, the abilities, I don't have to learn that. So when we start to move into beer, and that process needs to take place in every one of our cannabis operations, I can actually leverage their development, what they've known, and not have to learn it the hard way, right? So that was one of the things that really made us want to push in hard on craft beer. But the other things, you have to learn is really processes on food manufacturing. You want to be looking at long-term goals. So we built our facilities FDA ready. We had a process authority come in and audit them as if we were capable of getting an FDA certificate for the facility. SOPs that are going to survive the future. Do you have a HACCP plan, right? Because the FDA is going to want to see those. And now you see states like California that are now requiring them. So the forward planning is working.
So I just want to, as we start to think about wrapping up, I want to make it clear. These guys are thinking very clearly about the future, and also in so doing, knowing the sort of larger entities that they're going to be tangling with, are also considering how they're going to survive the future. And I think if we keep an eye on both of those, we could very well have a sustainable set of companies. So thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you all.